Privileged to be moderating an eminent panel here with so much of experience and across the spectrum of investments. Say, for example, Imran has been there for 16 years. I was like talking to him. It's amazing. Obviously, we're all now getting very, very, I would say, worried or concerned about the way we're seeing these unicorns. Every day you open a newspaper and a new unicorn is born. And which is where even people like me who had a company sold and say, I want to create another unicorn. Let's hope. But
Please send your business plan to us first.
yeah, so what do you think, guys? Are you think the companies are fairly valued, overvalued, or are the metrics which are used today to really measure the valuation of a company? Traditionally, I remember when I was raising the fund for myself, it was some X of EBITDA, okay, which is now out of the window, and now we're talking about 20, 30, 40X of sales. Unheard. So, what are your views? I'd like to start with you because you've been investing in the seed companies, and you start this, and then obviously I want to hear from all three of you.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks for the very easy question. So I think a few things have changed, in our lifetimes, and I'll just highlight a few of those. Just to give you a background from where I'm coming, so I started my career investing in listed markets. I spent nearly 20 years with Dr. Mobius at Templeton, so I'm a hardcore value investor, fundamentally driven, and then I'm now doing seed to Series A, very, very early stage companies. I think that in terms of valuation, the world has changed, and I think we need to grapple with this changed reality. And the faster we do that, I think the faster we'll be able to make sense of what's happening around us. If you look at financial theory or all these valuation techniques that we've used all our life, right from DCF to all the esoteric option valuation, this whole entire financial theory of valuation is about 100 years old. All of these concepts, all of these metrics that we use, you said price to sales, price to earnings, EBIT, EBITDA, etc. They all were born in an era which was the manufacturing era globally, right? You and I now live in a world which has moved away from manufacturing. Of course, manufacturing still exists, but the companies that we are talking about, the future that we are seeing belongs to services, products, technology, etc. So using the same metrics that I did at Templeton for valuing, let's say Reliance or L&T or Infosys, if I take that same framework and apply it to early stage companies, it'll be a huge disaster. So I think if you change the lens through which you're looking at the thing, that company, you will arrive at a very different conclusion. And in investments, as we say, beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. So if somebody is willing to give you 20x revenue, that's the right price.
Yeah, so firstly, I know you've been saying 35 unicorns, 36 unicorns. My personal sense is that India will have at least 100 unicorns in the next 18 months.
Fantastic.
There is the opportunity set that is there out is just mind-boggling, and let's not look at it from a valuation lens alone. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. As Rajesh said, the world is actually changing, and we are in a situation where, unlike 2000, where when the dot-com thing happened, there is tangible adoption of digital across, and I think nowhere else in the world apart from China does it manifest itself more in your face than it does in India. I think it's Indians by and large have adopted to digital technologies very, very well. So what is leading to the valuations is basically massive adoption coming through in these businesses. Is the valuation right? Is the valuation expensive? What lens to do it from? What metrics to apply? Every case is different, every business. And who are we to say what is right or wrong? Time will tell what is right or wrong.
I think market is always right.
Market is always right. So one thing that we cannot deny is the fact that as the financial community globally is betting massively on digital adoption, and more so in India, and that is the reason you are seeing so much of capital chase these businesses. So frankly, like I said, 100 unicorns in the next 18 months, entirely possible.
Brilliant. And already we are actually ranked in number 3 in terms of number of unicorns. Although there is a large gap between us and China, the number of unicorns China has and India has. But I was seeing yesterday the data. I was like amazed the way we are catching up. Actually, this is
The fastest rate of growth in terms of number of unicorns is here.
yeah.
I've stopped calling them unicorns only because unicorn by definition is very exclusive and rare. ये हर हफ्ते एक हो रहा है यहाँ.
Yeah, Imran.
Thanks, Milan. No, is unicorn is the fact that we are the third largest in the world in unicorns? Is that a good thing? I think it's an excellent thing. Yeah. Because for the longest time, I've been investing for 16 years. Every time we went on a fundraising trip, we had to sell India. And I think the fact that we are the third largest in something is just great branding. India, and we've been shouting from rooftops for a long time that don't bunch us with emerging markets. India is an asset class by itself. It's a very large, deep market. And New India, which is what I think Ritesh and Rajesh are alluding to, is going to capture 80% of the incremental value over the next decade. So you can't ignore it. In general, the unicorn phenomenon is good. Within the unicorn portfolio, are they overvalued assets? Absolutely. And are they undervalued and fair valued assets? Absolutely. And that's a topic for another discussion. You should pick wisely. But in general, I think it's a very positive thing.
Yeah, just taking this forward, just wanted to understand where, I mean, you guys are professional investors, so you know things better. We really want to hear from you. What are the 4 or 5 key metrics which you guys consider before you make an investment? Okay, saying this is the 5 tick boxes I need. If they tick, I am going to invest into this company. Barring valuation, I'm just keeping the valuation out of this, but how would you really make an investment?
So, we are right at the bottom of the life cycle of a business. We are seed to Series A. So really the company is starting, the business starting here. Things that we look for, and we have a whole list of how we go about it. I think the most important is the team that's going to deliver, the founder or the founding team. At Equanimity, we spend anywhere between 2 to 4 months with those people, both in office settings, our office, their office, have a beer with the chap, get him drunk, he tries to get us drunk, all of that, and try to really understand the person and the people behind that idea. I think that's one. Second, because we are early stage, we focus a lot on the size of the opportunity. So we're always looking for those entrepreneurs who want to address a very sizable, scalable kind of business. Third, because we firmly believe that in India, we are a poor country, by the way. Please don't go by the unicorns. We still remain a poor country. So if somebody has to set up a business in India, that has to be really scalable, huge. Unit economics is paramount. So we spend a lot of time in understanding, can this business deliver whatever product, service they are offering at a certain unit economics that will make sense to India, right? So India and Bharat, that's distinction that we have. I think these are the 3 most important things for us. Without these 3, everything else just doesn't matter. We look at a few other things as well, execution capability, all of that, competition, what's the landscape, capital availability. After I invest, will I be able to sell it to him? Will he be able to sell it to him? All of that.
Correct.
But these 3 are the key.
Yes. So Ritesh, you are doing late stage investments.
Yeah, so I think the metrics don't change. As Rajesh said, team performance obviously is the most critical. And the one thing that we look for is hunger. How hungry is the promoter? How passionate is he about the business? Is he running a company or is he passionate about creating something? I think that, for me, tilts the balance more often than not. The other thing that we've realized now, and especially over the context of the last couple of years, is that capital itself is not, capital availability itself is not a competitive mode, right? So we look at competitive modes very, very differently. Today, if there's any business that can be disrupted by putting in $2 billion, $3 billion, assume that it will be disrupted. Because money availability is no longer an issue, right? So what is it that if somebody were to come in and say, listen, I want to spend $5 billion and disrupt this market, can he disrupt it, or can the product stand on its own grounds? So those are the kind of competitive modes that one looks at very, very carefully these days. And obviously, like scalability for us becomes a very, very critical question. As Imran would tell you, India has always held a lot of promise, but has always erred on the side of under delivering. So for us, the ability of the entrepreneur to conceptualize scale is hypercritical.
I explain our business in very simple terms. The easiest way to understand what Gaja Capital does is that we buy revenue and sell EBITDA. And when you go through the entire cycle of investing, let's say I go to your business, Rajesh, as I assume you buy narrative and sell revenue. And if you're a public market investor, you buy EBITDA and sell earnings. And at some point, as the business matures, you're buying profits and selling dividend yield. And so in this entire risk reward cycle, we've focused for 16 years exclusively on the buying of revenue and selling of EBITDA. And in doing this, the big considerations for us is, do we have the ability for management teams to create depth? So it's no longer now about the founder vision alone, but about building the next layer and the systems and processes to be able to squeeze out the EBITDA. So basically, the startup to scale up journey is where we spend a lot of our time.
Right. One thing which keeps going in my mind, and when I keep talking to several friends, family, everybody's started investing into a startup, or I would say an unlisted equity, whether it was NSE, blah blah blah, whatever it is. Now these individuals are taking. I've seen a lot of individuals taking in individual bets. And you guys are running fund, and I'm a big follower of a fund, by the way. So why should somebody not go ahead and invest into directly into a company, and why should they be investing via a fund? Because they think I'm going to pay a management fee, I'm going to pay a share of a profit, and that is going to bring down my returns. So why should I share those profits? Why should I pay these fees? They're not doing anything. They're just investing and just holding on for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. And I got to pay a real big money. So I really want to understand from you, why would somebody come to you through a fund, and why not invest directly?
Kalpana, send him a PPM first. Yeah, he's a potential investor. Fund, yes. See, I'll tell you, this is a movie I've seen before. Your question is a question I've answered so many times in the late 90s. Yeah, so I started working with Templeton, once upon a time in the 90s. We were among the new foreign investors in India. Morgan Stanley had just happened before that. Harshad Mehta had just happened before that. And I think thanks to Mr. Ambani and Reliance, the whole equity culture was very retail. Mutual fund themselves were not around, by the way. So there was no fund, and therefore the retail investor culture in India grew, and it still pervades till date. And we had a tough time selling funds. Why should you buy a fund, a mutual fund, right? We had to introduce a lot of evangelizing for buying a mutual fund to retail investors. Today, when you look back, it seems like, really, did people have a problem in understanding why buying funds? Because everybody's buying funds, right? So I think we are just going through the same movie
but I'm
again.
paying 20-30% carry. That's the biggest.
Correct.
That's where the difference is. Buying a mutual fund, fees. Everybody's bringing down their fees. You do direct. You kind of lower your cost. Okay. You invest in an ETF. Cost is virtually not there. But here I'm paying 20-30% carry. And why should I pay 20-30% carry where I'm taking the risk? So that's the reason. See, it's like your partner's in my profit, and losses are all mine. So why that?
I think a few reasons, and it's therefore this is the model globally, by the way. And there are some nuances that we can discuss. First of all, you're paying for access. Listed market, you can go and buy, sell whenever you want. So you're buying for access, paying for access. If there is success, it's not an upfront fee like a mutual fund charges. First. Second, please remember, mutual fund fees are always on the NAV, right? Our fees are never on NAV, right? It's always on the cost. So the NAV essentially is that 20% of the carry that you're sharing is that NAV that you're paying. So, whether you eat like this or you eat like this.
This is very important for all of us to understand.
Yeah.
It is the carry is on. I mean, you're charging the fees only on AUM. I mean, basically the capital flow, not on the
Not
NAV.
on the NAV. Yeah. See, it's like this. We are a very. Some people allege. I think that's changing, and there's a reason why people feel so. We are a very opaque asset class compared to the listed markets, and rightly so. But I think that's changing very, very rapidly. Okay, and because we are opaque, there's a possibility for every good guy like us, there'll be some 5 guys who are out there. This is India, right? This is humankind. For every good guy, there'll be 5 others who are trying to make a quick buck. So, in an opaque asset class, if I try to charge you fees on the NAV, I can show anything as NAV because there is no market price. Price discovery is not happened by the market. Price discovery is happening by me. I'm biased. So, therefore, globally, this is the model. So, I think we need to keep this in mind when you're thinking of cost of access to this fund. So profit share is really, and a sharing in the NAV of the mutual fund. The mutual fund is doing it anyway. It's just that they don't call it that.
See, 2 questions that I took off. One is that should unlisted be in the asset class? And the answer is a clear yes. I think depending on what your risk allocation is, it could be anywhere between 10% to 25%. So that, to my mind, is a given. Question is whether you want to go down the fund route or you want to go down individual investing. I think there's no right or wrong answer to it. There are merits in both the categories. Like it is in listed equities, right? You do invest directly. You go through PMS structures. You go through mutual funds. So there are professionals who believe who are doing a relatively decent job. And as Rajesh said, few things kind of stand out. Are, in my view, are the advantages of going through a fund. One is obviously as access. The kind of deal flow that a fund typically lands up doing is typically not possible for a normal retail investor to look at. The second thing is diligence in terms of just knowing what is happening in that ecosystem, what is happening in that market, what is the background of the entrepreneur, what has he been doing. The third and the most critical is knowledge. Right? Or a view, if I mean. There is a hypothesis based on, when you're making an investment decision as a fund, you're formulating a hypothesis and then carrying it through, right? And that hypothesis is not alone based on your financial acumen, it's also based on market checks, it's based on your knowledge about the sector, about how the growth prospects are, and you're then taking a collective investment decision to do it, right? So, I mean, like I said, there are always people who believe that they can beat the market. There's nothing right or wrong about it. It's just 2 different routes to achieve the same objective.
I'd just add by saying that the limited partnership, the LPGP relationship, to my mind, is one of the biggest financial innovations of the last 25 years. And it's, I think, important to mention that, when you look at private equity and venture capital, the headlines about this industry is that over the long term, it underperforms public markets, by 500, 600 basis points. What people don't tell you enough is that this is a top quartile, top decile manager selection business. This has very little to do with the underlying assets. And I don't mean that is not the important driver. That's where the true value gets created. But for an LP, which is where you guys come in, this is about identifying and investing over the long term in top decile, top quartile managers. And what that means is institutions that have developed the specialization, the knowledge, the ecosystem, the ability to buy well, own well, sell well, and you do it time and time and time again. And that's what creates the cumulative engine that drives the averages that now form part of global headlines.
Thanks. There has been a question which has been running in my mind, and thankfully there are no regulators, no finance ministry guys here. So I have a question. India is talking about startup India. That's what the mantra of this government is. And investing in a startup or a startup fund is unfortunately not attractive as far as the taxation is concerned. So why does, I mean, you set of funds or set of people, because today you get taxed 25% for investing into an unlisted equity. I'm talking about long term, which is I think 10% long term for listed equity.
It is 25, it's 27%, but within.
Yeah, 27%. Yeah. So to me, if India has to progress, there has to be something done by the government. This is one of the areas which I'm thinking, but I'm sure there are several other points which you may want to make. And I'm sure some of you can even represent and meet the finance ministry and get your things done. So just wanted to hear from you, what are the things which you, if you were given opportunity, what are the 2 things you would like to change?
It's a question you should ask when the finance ministry guy is here.
Yeah, but
So it's been
we
a
want to be
long
non-controversial.
standing-
So yeah, right.
It's
now.
been a long-standing demand of the industry. There's nothing controversial about it. I
Right.
think it just makes sense. If you want to encourage a certain ecosystem, you have to provide some benefits. Not to say that the government is not doing anything. I mean, they've done a lot, and I can vouch for that. There are companies get tax benefits for an extended period of time. There are certain budgets that they have that they allocate for true blue research, development, etc. in India. So there's enough and more that's going about, at least in our ecosystem, the early stage part of the story. Also, we are a Cat 2 fund, and therefore it's a complete pass-through to investors, and therefore they have the ability of managing their tax at their end. So I think, to be fair, it's not that nothing has been done, but people like us will always keep asking for more.
Yeah. Dil mange more.
So I actually have a slightly contrarian view to this. I think look at the profile of the investors who are investing, especially in the AIF categories, right? The minimum threshold is about a crore for AIF investments in unlisted businesses in category 2 funds.
Yeah.
Frankly, I mean, if they're making money, I see nothing wrong in them paying 27% tax.
Absolutely no problem.
And the reality of the situation is that these are all individuals who are what I would classify as high net worth individuals. There's enough and more capital available. It's not that capital is being starved to the ecosystem. If that were the case, then I would certainly make a strong case for articulating incentives for capital to come into the ecosystem. India is not a capital starved country as far as startup ecosystems are concerned. And if the LPs have to pay a 27% tax on it, on profits made, it's okay. I mean, honestly, I know it's not the, like Rajesh said, everybody would love lower taxation, but I'm firmly in the camp that, listen, it's fine.
Great to hear.
I actually agree with you there because and mathematically, if you look at 27% with indexation, if you hold it long enough, the differential is much narrower. So it's frankly a non-issue. But we put out a note earlier on what the government can do to really kickstart the domestic LP base. Ritesh, you were telling us earlier that 4% of the total private equity venture capital investing per year is from domestic capital. And how do you take this 4% to 15%, 20% as you see in China and the US? So one thought we had is, and one thing that the government should do is take 10,000 crores, give it to 10 fund of funds. They in turn, put in 1,000 crores each, in AIFs like all of us here. And subject to that capital being no more than 20% of the overall pool. And if you do this multiplier of 5x, that 10,000 crores can come back multiplied as 250,000 crores. And that in turn creates job creation, in turn helps your $5 trillion GDP goal. So that's a tangible commercial thing that the government can do to really kickstart the domestic LP base in the country. So I hope someone's listening to this, and I hope this happens.
But I mean, just to give you added perspective to this, folks like Sidvi and all are doing a remarkable job in capitalizing, right? So there's enough and more capital available on tap to go and access that pool of capital.
Right.
I'm glad the tax guys are not here. They would say, "Sab theek hai."
Correct.
No.
Fantastic. No, it's if you guys are happy, it's fantastic. The government is doing its job. I think that's fantastic. So I'm sure with so much of experience you guys have, what is the change which you saw? I mean, obviously, as you said, the world is changing. So what are the 3 significant changes which you saw in last 10 years in this industry? Because I remember the Indian investors, domestic investors were never possibly investing into directly into these funds. So what do you think has changed?
So I think first of all, I am a living proof of that change. By the way, listed markets, early stage, right? So I definitely saw some stuff. So I changed my whole perspective on this. I think one is swift adoption of technology, huge change, like digitization of everything. And I'm not talking just about the last 18 months, because last 18 months has just given a fillip to that whole path or that curve that was getting formed. It just got sharper. But I think there is no other way of doing business today which can be much more efficient without technology. Give me one business model that cannot benefit from the use of technology. I don't have an answer to that. I keep asking this question all the time. So one of the key drivers that has changed this whole ecosystem, the whole way of doing business, is technology adoption. And I don't think it's going anywhere. Second is trust in this technology. I still remember when the first time I had, personally, to input my credit card detail in my mobile phone. There was so much trepidation. I had like, all my money will go away, those kind of thoughts. This is like way back. And I'm sure there's a generation of people now, older than us, who is still facing or were facing those challenges.
Sure.
Right? But the new generation, and we don't have to discuss the whole pyramid of the demographic pyramid of India, because there's a whole generation here for whom if they touch a surface and it doesn't respond, it's like, really? It doesn't respond? So, the way of living is changed big time. But I'll allow Imran to add to that.
See, I think structurally, if I was to break it down, there are two significant changes which have happened. One is obviously the opportunity set, whether you call it digitalization or consumption or, growth in the ecosystem. That's become very large and visible. So people are using the brands, people are seeing value being created, and they certainly want to partake in some part of that. The second significant change that's happened in the ecosystem itself is structural and regulatory clarity about this. I think the whole AIF ecosystem, the development of that AIF ecosystem has been a massive.
Correct.
And I have no hesitation in saying SEBI has done a fantastic job with it.
Perfect.
Right? So I think, we, as consequence of that ecosystem, I can tell you, it's one of the better regulated ecosystems in the world, right? So once transparency, once, the benefits of investing in a structured product regulated by a government entity comes through, you are seeing retail participation increase and broad base itself. We've got investors from, I can tell you, tier 3 towns.
Fantastic.
And just goes to show that, and just as an aside, I was actually telling them, have you ever done unlisted equities before? Because the reality is people are investing because it's the flavor of the season to invest in unlisted equities, but you really have to ask those questions to those investors. And the fact of the matter is, I was very pleasantly surprised at the level of knowledge base that existed. So structurally, I think a lot of ducks have kind of aligned themselves to get us to where we are today.
Access to information, I think.
Access to information, as I said, regulatory clarity,
Correct.
the fact that it is a regulated product, it
Correct.
is not the Wild West.
Correct.
A couple of things. I think the generation change is certainly a factor, because now you have the new generation taking capital allocation decisions, and a lot of families and they think differently. They've traveled and lived abroad. They've seen how private equity and venture capital works, and likes to invest in like. So there's another factor that is driving a lot of this, which is new wealth creation has increasingly been in New India. And new India generated wealth wants to invest in New India back again. So that's the other factor. And third, the availability of now institutional managers. Now a lot of us have 10, 20 years of experience. You have a fairly deep market now. And finally, the mainstreaming of New India. Total market cap in India is roughly 3.5 trillion. Less than 5% of that market cap is New India. When this starts inching towards 10, 15%, and this can happen pretty quickly, it can snowball in the next 2 to 3 years, you can't ignore it, because 80% of the new value is going to come from New India.
It's a very interesting
You need a
number.
piece of it.
Yeah. A very
I add
interesting
2
number.
points to this
Yeah.
question. Just taken off from what Imran said. So two data points, which are big changes that we are seeing as we live. First is there was a report by Credit Suisse last year on unicorns, 100 unicorns it was called. The first figure, the first chart on that in that whole report showed that it was an eye opener for me, and I work in this very ecosystem, right? That for the last 10 years, and now we're in the 11th year, each year the amount of money that has come into private markets is higher than what has come into the public markets.
Wow.
Each year. I actually called up Neelkant and I said, do you have the base data for this? Is this right?
Correct.
And
Very interesting.
That's a statistic. That's a fact, right? Now 11th year, each year, money coming into private markets much higher than money coming into public markets. One. Second, I think the big change, which is going to accelerate the trends that you guys also mentioned, is that technology and the markets, you and me, us consumers, we are supporting tremendous rate of growth of businesses on the ground. Yeah, whether it is a Swiggy, Zomato. I mean, there's a company in our portfolio which has grown 10x in revenues. This is not GMV, this is not eyeball, this is actual money earned revenues. 10x in the last 12 months. On this base, we are growing 10x in the next 6 months.
Fantastic.
Real revenues, right? It's not manufactured. So, and this is just one example, right? You have hundreds of such companies on the ground across sectors.
Fantastic. So India is shining. So how do you really kind of look at risk and liquidity, which are and then actually wind it up with actually your favorite sector which you think we have to invest. So I think we are just running out of time. So just quickly on these 2 points. Yeah, liquidity, risk, and your favorite sector.
Liquidity for the asset class, right?
Yeah, because it's a highly liquid.
Yeah,
How do you really?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, please remember, and I keep repeating this again and again and again. It is an illiquid asset class, so you have to devote or allocate only that much part of your portfolio. That
Bit on your side, how do you manage your liquidity in terms of how are you going to ensure that you're going to try and exit for your clients?
Oh, that's been actually good. So again, some number, right? This year, just this year, 21, and it's an outlier year, so we all know that, right? But this year, the amount of exits in our ecosystem, all three of us put together, is nearly $50 billion. And to your point, a lot of this money is going to come back into the ecosystem as being invested, because this is money made by people in the ecosystem, and they understand this ecosystem, right? You go to Bangalore, you just have to go to Bangalore and see the number of millionaires who are supporting other founders, etc., etc., etc. So exits are happening, right? I mean, in our fund, and we are a very new fund, by the way, we just in our 4th year, we've already seen out of 14 companies 2 exits.
Fantastic.
Right? And it's not, I'm not an outlier, right? The other funds, many funds
Correct.
who are seeing this. So exits, which was, I think, the biggest question on investors' mind till about 3-4 years back, is now, I think, sorted.
Fantastic.
So, as far as we are concerned, we come in fairly late in the business. So, there are multiple rounds which have already happened. There's a large pool of capital which is already there. And my fundamental belief has always been a great asset will always command liquidity. It doesn't matter whether it's an unlisted asset or not. A great business will always have liquidity. Just to give you added data points, about a third of the PE trades in this country over the last 5 years have always been secondary trades. So there's a very vibrant secondary ecosystem which is already available to do that. And obviously with the IPO markets being where they are, I think that's a great outcome for everything to have. From a sectoral perspective, personally we are very, very bullish on 2 core sectors. One is consumer tech and the other is SaaS.
SaaS.
Yeah, I think from as a house, we've been espousing the cause of direct-to-consumer brands for a very, very long time. We continue to see that momentum build up, and we're quite excited by the prospects. And again, SaaS is an opportunity which is not talked about much, but we're very, very bullish on that
Great.
opportunity.
So we've had a good exit track record. Out of 23 investments we made over 16 years, we've had 13 exits, 6 IPOs. We've exited through cross-border M&A. We've exited through large buyout firms like KKR. So what we've learned over the last 16 years is that you need to invest in companies and have multiple exit routes open for those assets and not depend on IPO markets that could be flush with cash one time and then be drained out at the other. So you need to have multiple options. And so we've demonstrated exits in good times and bad, multiple vintages in different ways. So that's one. On favorite sectors, we are sector specialists. We've done all our work in education, financial services, consumer, and increasingly
I want your
in software.
two top sectors.
And if I had to pick my two favorites, it would be EdTech and SaaS.
EdTech and SaaS. Perfect. So we have a SaaS which is in common. So great. We've just run out of time. Thank you very much, Rajesh, Ritesh, and Imran for sparing your time. It was wonderful talking to you. I hope we had more time, but we just run out of time. Thank you very much
Thanks,
for you
Mohan.
being there. Yeah.
Thanks, man. Thanks.